Miyamoto Musashi. On June 13, 1645, 61-year-old Miyamoto Musashi sat kneeling in a cave called Reigondo near Kumamoto. Musashi had spent decades as Japan's most feared swordsman, fighting 61 duels to the death and never losing a single one. He developed a revolutionary two-sword fighting technique and written treatises on strategy that influenced military thinking for centuries. By 1645, Musashi had retired from dueling. He'd spent his final years as a hermit, living in the cave and dedicating himself to philosophy, painting and writing. His body had begun failing. He developed thoracic cancer that caused pain and difficulty breathing. Musashi knew his death was approaching. Rather than seeking medical treatment or comfort, he chose to spend his remaining time in solitude and contemplation. He sat at a small wooden desk in the cave, writing by candlelight. In his final weeks, Musashi composed the Dokudo, meaning the way of walking alone. This brief text contained 21 precepts for living an independent, disciplined life. The rules reflected his lifetime of martial experience distilled into philosophical wisdom. On June 13th, Miyamoto Musashi died while kneeling at his desk in Reigondo Cave. The man who'd killed dozens of opponents in single combat died peacefully from natural causes, a writing brush in his hand rather than a sword. Musashi's death was extraordinary precisely because it was ordinary. The deadliest swordsman in Japanese history never fell in battle. He died undefeated, his perfect record intact. His writings, particularly the Book of Five Rings and the Dokudo, became foundational texts in Japanese martial philosophy. Saigo Takamori. On September 24, 1877, 49-year-old Saigo Takamori stood on Shiroyama Hill near Kagoshima, surrounded by government forces. Saigo had been one of the architects of the Meiji Restoration, helping overthrow the Tokugawa shogunate and restore imperial rule. However, he'd grown disillusioned with the new government's modernization policies and treatment of the samurai class. Saigo had led the Satsuma Rebellion, the last major samurai uprising against the imperial government. For months, his forces fought against the modern conscript army, equipped with rifles and artillery. By September 1877, Saigo's rebel army had been reduced to a few hundred men trapped on Shiroyama. The Battle of Shiroyama began before dawn on September 24th. Government forces numbering over 30,000 attacked from all sides. Saigo's remaining samurai fought with traditional swords and spears against overwhelming firepower. The battle was hopeless. During the fighting, a bullet struck Saigo in the hip. He fell, unable to stand. As government forces closed in, Saigo knew capture was imminent. According to samurai tradition, he decided to commit seppuku, ritual suicide, to preserve his honor. However, his injury prevented him from performing the ritual properly. Saigo couldn't maintain the kneeling position required for seppuku. His loyal lieutenant, Beppu Shinsuke, had to support him physically while Saigo attempted to cut his abdomen. Unable to complete the ritual himself, Saigo gave the signal. Beppu performed kaishaku, the act of beheading to end suffering during seppuku. Saigo Takamori died on Shiroyama Hill. The Battle of Shiroyama marked the end of the samurai era. Saigo became known as the Last Samurai, though his story bore little resemblance to the Hollywood film. He died fighting for a world that was disappearing, killed by the modernization he'd helped create. Oda Nobunaga. On June 21, 1582, 47-year-old Oda Nobunaga was staying at Honnoji Temple in Kyoto. Nobunaga had spent decades unifying Japan through brutal military campaigns and political maneuvering. He controlled approximately half of Japan's provinces and was on the verge of complete dominance. His ruthless tactics had made him both feared and hated. That morning, Nobunaga was at the temple. With only a small retinue of guards, most of his army was away on distant campaigns. One of his trusted generals, Akechi Mitsuhide, was supposed to be marching west to join another campaign. Instead, Mitsuhide turned his army toward Koito. Around dawn, Akechi Mitsuhide's 13,000 troops surrounded Honnoji Temple. Nobunaga woke to the sounds of gunfire and his guards fighting. He initially thought it was a minor disturbance, but quickly realized the temple was under full assault. Nobunaga grabbed a bow and fought from inside the temple, shooting at attackers. However, the situation was hopeless. He was vastly outnumbered, and Mitsuhide's forces were setting fire to the temple buildings. As flames engulfed Honnoji, Nobunaga retreated into the interior of the burning temple. Knowing death was certain, he chose to commit seppuku rather than be captured or killed by his enemies. He performed the ritual suicide as the temple burned around him. Oda Nobunaga died inside the flaming temple. However, his body was never found. The intense fire reduced everything to ash, and no remains could be definitively identified as Nobunaga's. The absence of a body sparked centuries of speculation. Some theorists claimed Nobunaga escaped and lived in hiding. However, he almost certainly died in the temple, his body simply consumed entirely by the flames. The disappearance of Japan's most powerful warlord's remains added mystery to his already legendary status. Sanada Yukimura. On June 3, 1615, 48-year-old Sanada Yukimura fought in the summer siege of Osaka, the final battle that would establish Tokugawa dominance over Japan. Yukimura had allied with the Toyotomi clan against Tokugawa Ieyasu's forces. He was renowned as the Crimson Demon for his red armor and fearless combat. That day, Yukimura led a desperate assault directly at Tokugawa Ieyasu's command post. His forces broke through multiple defensive lines, coming closer to killing the future shogun than anyone else in the battle. Tokugawa's forces were thrown into chaos. However, Yukimura's men were outnumbered and eventually forced to retreat. The fighting had been intense. Yukimura himself had been in constant combat for hours. By the time his forces fell back, he was physically exhausted. Yukimura made his way to a small shrine called Yasui Shrine. He removed his distinctive red helmet and sat down against a tree to rest. His body could no longer continue fighting. Enemy soldiers soon spotted him sitting there. According to historical accounts, when the soldiers approached, Yukimura recognized that escape was impossible. He reportedly said, "I am Sanada Yukimura. Take my head." He made no attempt to defend himself or flee. The soldiers killed Yukimura where he sat. His head was taken as proof of his death. Sanada Yukimura, who'd fought so fiercely just hours before, died too exhausted to resist. His final words acknowledged both his identity and his acceptance of death. Yukimura became a legendary figure in Japanese culture, celebrated for his bravery and loyalty, despite fighting on the losing side of history. Uesugi Kenshin. On April 19, 1578, 48-year-old Uesugi Kenshin collapsed in his castle's lavatory. Kenshin, known as the Dragon of Echigo, had been one of the most powerful warlords of the Sengoku period. He'd fought numerous campaigns and was famous for his rivalry with Takeda Shingen. On the morning of April 19th, Kenshin had been experiencing stomach pain. He went to the lavatory and collapsed there. Servants found him unconscious. He never regained consciousness and died 4 days later on April 23rd. The official cause of death was likely a stroke or similar medical emergency. However, the circumstances of his death in the lavatory sparked legends. One persistent story claimed an assassin had hidden in the cesspit beneath Kenshin's toilet for days, then speared him from below at his most vulnerable moment. While the assassination story is almost certainly false, it became part of Kenshin's legend. The idea that such a powerful warlord could be killed by an enemy hiding in human waste appealed to storytellers. The truth, that he died from natural causes while using the toilet, was both more mundane and more human. Kenshin's death left his domain without a clear successor, leading to internal conflict. The man who'd survived countless battles died suddenly from illness. Akechi Mitsuhide. On July 2, 1582, 54-year-old Akechi Mitsuhide was fleeing through the countryside near Kyoto. Just 11 days earlier, Mitsuhide had committed one of the most shocking betrayals in Japanese history. He'd attacked his lord Oda Nobunaga at Honnoji Temple, forcing Nobunaga's death. Mitsuhide had briefly seized power, but his reign lasted only 13 days. Toyotomi Hideyoshi, one of Nobunaga's other generals, rushed back from a distant campaign and defeated Mitsuhide's forces at the Battle of Yamazaki. After the battle, Mitsuhide fled with a small group of retainers. They traveled through the countryside, trying to reach safety. Mitsuhide wore expensive golden armor that marked him as a high-ranking warrior. As Mitsuhide's group passed through a village called Ogarusu, they encountered local farmers. One farmer, seeing the golden armor, realized this was someone valuable. The farmers attacked with bamboo spears, hoping to claim the armor and any reward. In the chaotic struggle, a bamboo spear struck Mitsuhide. The wound was serious enough that he couldn't continue fleeing. Realizing capture was imminent, Mitsuhide committed seppuku to avoid being taken alive. His head was then taken by the farmers. The man who'd killed Oda Nobunaga, one of Japan's most powerful warlords, died at the hands of peasants with improvised weapons. The golden armor that should have protected him had instead marked him as a target. Akechi Mitsuhide's death was as ignominious as his brief rule. Ishida Mitsunari. On November 6, 1600, 40-year-old Ishida Mitsunari was executed in Kyoto. Mitsunari had been one of the leaders of the Western Coalition at the Battle of Sekigahara, the decisive battle that gave Tokugawa Ieyasu control of Japan. The Western Coalition had lost, and Mitsunari was captured. As a high-ranking prisoner, Mitsunari was paraded through Kyoto before his execution. Large crowds gathered to see the defeated general. He was sentenced to death by beheading. On the day of his execution, Mitsunari was brought to the execution ground. As was customary, he was offered a final drink of water. However, the guard didn't have water immediately available, and instead offered Mitsunari a dried persimmon. Mitsunari refused the persimmon. When asked why, he explained that persimmons were bad for digestion. The guard and witnesses were stunned by this response. Mitsunari was about to be beheaded, yet he was still concerned about his digestive health. The incident became famous as an example of Mitsunari's character. Even facing imminent death, he maintained concern for his body's well-being. Some interpreted this as absurd, others as an example of extreme discipline and presence of mind. Moments later, Ishida Mitsunari was beheaded. His head was displayed publicly as a warning to anyone who might oppose the Tokugawa. The man who'd carefully refused a persimmon for health reasons died seconds later. Hijikata Toshizo. On June 20th, 1869, 34-year-old Hijikata Toshizo fought in the Battle of Hakodate on the northern island of Hokkaido. Hijikata was the vice commander of the Shinsengumi, a special police force that had fought for the Tokugawa shogunate during Japan's Civil War. After the shogunate's fall, Hijikata and other loyalists had retreated to Hokkaido to continue resistance. The Battle of Hakodate was one of the last major engagements of the Boshin War. Imperial forces, equipped with modern weapons and ships, vastly outnumbered Hijikata's forces. The battle was essentially the final stand of those who opposed Japan's modernization. During the fighting, Hijikata led a cavalry charge against imperial positions. He rode at the front, wielding both traditional weapons and a modern rifle. As his forces advanced, imperial troops opened fire with rifles. A bullet struck Hijikata in the lower back as he charged on horseback. The wound was serious. He fell from his horse. His men tried to help him, but Hijikata Toshizo died from the gunshot wound on the battlefield. His death marked a symbolic moment. Hijikata had been one of the last samurai warriors actively fighting against modernization. His death by rifle fire, rather than sword, exemplified the transition Japan was undergoing. The age of the samurai was ending, replaced by modern warfare. Hijikata's body was buried in Hakodate. He became a legendary figure, representing the samurai spirit, fighting against inevitable change. His death effectively marked the end of the samurai era in Japan. Takeda Shingen. On May 13, 1573, 51-year-old Takeda Shingen died during a military campaign. Shingen had been one of the most powerful warlords in Japan, controlling substantial territory and commanding a formidable army. His rivalry with Uesugi Kenshin had produced some of the era's most famous battles. In 1573, Shingen was leading his army toward Kyoto, intending to overthrow the shogunate. However, he fell ill during the campaign. The exact cause is disputed. Some accounts claim he died from illness, possibly pneumonia. Others suggest he was shot by a sniper during a siege and died from infection. Regardless of the cause, Shingen realized he was dying. He gave final instructions to his generals. Most importantly, he ordered them to keep his death secret for 3 years. He wanted to prevent enemies from attacking while his clan transitioned to new leadership. Takeda Shingen died in his camp. His generals followed his orders. They concealed his death from everyone outside the innermost circle of retainers. Some accounts claim they used a body double, called a kagemusha, to impersonate Shingen at public appearances. For 3 years, the Takeda clan maintained the deception. Enemies who feared Shingen's military genius held back from attacking, believing he still lived. Messages and orders were issued in Shingen's name. The secret was maintained until the clan felt strong enough to reveal the truth. When the truth finally emerged, it shocked Japan. The man who'd been thought to command armies had been dead for years. Takeda Shingen's posthumous deception was perhaps his most successful strategy, buying his clan 3 crucial years. Minamoto no Yorimasa. On June 20th, 1180, 74-year-old Minamoto no Yorimasa faced defeat at the Battle of Uji. Yorimasa had been a respected warrior and poet of the late Heian period. He'd raised arms against the Taira clan, but was defeated at the Uji River. Realizing the battle was lost and capture was imminent, Yorimasa decided to commit suicide rather than face dishonor. What he did next became historically significant. Yorimasa retreated to the Byodoin temple near the battlefield. He took out a fan and composed a death poem, writing it on the fan's surface. The poem reflected on his life and impending death. After finishing the poem, he performed seppuku, cutting his abdomen with his sword. This is considered one of the first clearly documented instances of ritual seppuku. While samurai had committed suicide before, Yorimasa's death established many elements that would become standard in the ritual: the death poem, the formal setting, and the specific method. Minamoto no Yorimasa died at age 74, remarkable for the era. His death helped codify seppuku as the honorable death for defeated samurai. The practice would continue for nearly 700 years, becoming central to samurai culture. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe for similar ones, and feel free to drop suggestions for the next video in the comments.